realized that chart is a complete crock. It does not show anything. It only shows that when Lucy Letby was on duty, she was on duty. That's all it shows. It doesn't show anything else. And the question that needs to be asked is, how was that chart put together?
Lucy Letby is Britain's most prolific child killer. A retrial last month found her guilty of the attempted murder of a newborn girl. Having already been found guilty of killing 7 babies and trying to kill 6 others, that was her 15th conviction. And yet, despite Letby being found guilty at those 2 trials and her attempts to appeal against her convictions being rejected twice by judges over the past few months, doubts over her guilt do not seem to be going away. As well as the conspiracy theories in certain corners of the online world, in the week since the retrial ended, a number of scientific experts have expressed their opinion about the safety of the convictions. We'll speak to one of our reporters who covered the trial shortly. But first, let's speak to John O'Quigley, Professor of Statistical Science at UCL. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, you have concerns about the statistics, which were only one part of the evidence at the trial. So in the simplest terms, for our audience who would like to try to understand this, what are the concerns?
Yes, the concerns are, I'm focused only on the statistics. The concern is, if you look at the opening statements of the chief prosecutor, Nick Johnson, and his closing statements, he leans very, very heavily on statistics, actually. Firstly, by saying there was a spike, an inexplicable, that was the term I think he used, an inexplicable spike in the number of deaths in 2015 and the first part of 2016. And then the second part of that is, which follows, is to say, well, listen, if there's an inexplicable spike, then how can that be explained? It cannot be explained in ordinary random explanations of statistics. It points to some kind of nefarious action. And so the second question then is, if that is the case, who could be that person? And so, as Nick Johnson said, it's simply a process of elimination. Certainly, the consultants do not have the opportunity to be there sufficiently often, neither do the administration. So we end up with the nurses. Now, among the nurses, the nurse that was there by far the most was Lucy Letby.
Right.
So everything points to Lucy Letby. And if you were a member of the jury and you're convinced, as both sides seem to have been convinced, that there really was an inexplicable spike in the death rate, then the only task you really have is to decide, well, who is that person? Now, to indicate who that person might be, they came up with this chart, the roster, the so-called roster, who was there when suspicious events took place. And if you look at the roster, I'm not sure if you've seen it, or you may have seen it, but it looks very overwhelming. This looks as the, and I think it was referred to by somebody at least as the smoking gun. This is the smoking gun.
Yes,
In
because,
fact,
so what they've done is they put the names of the 38 nurses who'd worked on the unit on one of the axes, and then every other nurse had a handful of crosses showing that they were on duty during the incidents. But Lucy Letby had an unbroken row of crosses beside her name, putting her at the scene for every death and collapse.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I myself, even though I had doubts about this whole case, because there were others, because it's very similar to other cases. When I saw that chart, I myself thought, wow, this is the smoking gun. Of course, when I looked at it more closely and realized how it was they put the chart together, then I realized that chart is a complete crock. It does not show anything. It only shows that when Lucy Letby was on duty, she was on duty. That's all it shows. It doesn't show anything else. And the question that needs to be asked is, how was that chart put together? It was put together initially by the consultants, the accusers of Lucy Letby, and then it was passed to the prosecution's expert witness, Dowie Evans, to select those cases. which he considered to be suspicious. We
But
have no
can I,
definition.
yeah.
Sorry,
So I
please go ahead.
just wanted to make the point, and again, this is probably a clumsy way of putting it, but the word coincidence has been used in that. Yes, this was, these were shifts that Lucy Letby she was on shift, and during those times, these children died. However, some people presumably would look at these statistics, regardless of how they'd been presented, and say, well, that is too much of a coincidence.
But in fact, it's no kind of a coincidence. It looks that way. I agree. It looks like some very strong coincidence. It looks like a very, very strong correlation. But of course, it's not, because if you're trying to show who is present when a suspicious event occurs, firstly, you need to define what you mean by a suspicious event. And the only definition we seem to have is Lucy Letby's presence.
Right.
So if her presence is defining an event that is suspicious, we're not looking at all the events. We're looking at a subset. We're looking at a small subset of the events,
now,
only the ones involving
yes.
Lucy Letby.
No,
I'm sorry, go on.
I understand that you said at the beginning of this interview that you only want to talk about the statistical side of things, and the prosecution didn't rely solely on medical and statistical evidence. It presented circumstantial evidence as well. For example, her handwritten note saying, "I am evil, I did this," her trophies in the form of confidential documents pertaining to some of her victims, Facebook searches for the parents of her victims, sometimes months after their deaths. Again, we can argue over all of these things. The point is that the statistics part was just part of it. It wasn't all of it.
I mean, that's a good point. It seems to have been, nonetheless, a very crucial part. If we look at what was said by the Chief Prosecutor, Nick Johnson, in his opening statement and his closing statement, it looks to be very strong. And I would say that the first thing we need to do is to establish evidence of a crime. There is no evidence of a crime. That's the idea of a spike indicating a crime is actually not there. If you analyze this more carefully, there is no evidence of a crime. Then everything else comes after that. And it's quite easy to build up a case, as you say, built on circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
You can look at handwritten notes. I'll just say one quick thing. I don't
Yeah.
want to say a lot about that because it's out of my area of expertise. But I would just say that those handwritten notes also had the expression that I have done nothing wrong. So why are we looking at one aspect of the handwritten notes and not another? I do think that they require some explanation, but I don't think they were actually presented they were not focused upon during the trial, which tells me that the prosecution themselves did not feel they were strong.
Okay. I just wanted to, just before we speak to a correspondent of ours about this, I just wanted to ask you a slightly different question, which is, now I appreciate that you are looking at this from a kind of cold, hard statistical point of view, but presumably, do you feel uncomfortable raising this because of the crimes that we are talking about here, the deaths of small babies? It must be quite difficult to raise these concerns.
Yes and no. Obviously, if the person accused really carried out those crimes, then it's a horrendous thing. Just imagining such a crime is simply hard to even conceive. So I take your point on that. All the same, I think the parents of the babies involved, there's nothing more important to them, I would think, at this point than having the truth. If the truth is not as it has been presented, well, I think they would like to know what the truth actually is. I feel that it could be, I feel quite convinced actually that the truth is elsewhere. And at the very least, it needs to be looked at. And we can think of that outside of the case of Lucy Letby. We're looking at cases here in which there's no evidence of a crime. There are no witnesses. There is no motive. So all of a sudden, it's not only that the evidence is circumstantial, but we don't even have evidence of a crime.
Okay.
So this will happen again. This will happen again. And I think this is the reason it does need to be looked at.
Okay. Thank you very much for talking to us. That's John O'Quigley, is Professor of Statistical Science at UCL. We're also going to speak to the Sunday Times' Northern editor who covered the trials. This is David Collins. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning, Asma.
So you heard there what Jonah Quigley had to say. There's no evidence of crime, no witnesses, and no motive. Everything is, well, not everything, but a lot of this is circumstantial, and he's concerned about the stats.
I don't agree with quite a lot of that, in honesty. And I think it's helpful to start from the beginning on how the method used by the police and the medical experts in getting that rota together that we've just been talking about and compiling those statistics, because I think there's some fundamental kind of misunderstandings that are in the public sphere on how that was done. And I can just describe, because I've had in-depth conversations with the police and Dewey Evans, who was the chief medical expert on this very point. So what happened was, chronologically, is that in 2015 and 2016, we see the babies that eventually Letby was convicted of killing or attempting to kill. So that was happening, and suspicions were being raised within the hospital by the consultant team. There were emails being exchanged. There was suspicions being raised about Lucy Letby. There were certain medical staff who would not work with her. The consultants at the hospital at the time, as the previous guest said, they worked out that I think it was Stephen Braley, the consultant on the ward, who linked Lucy Letby to being present at a lot of these events. And the reason why they first started to look at it, not that there's no evidence of a crime, there actually is evidence of a crime, which I'll get onto. But the reason he first started looking at it is because there was no medical explanation for why these babies were dying. So they were so concerned about that they began, the consultants on the hospital, this is before the police were even involved, started to do their own investigations. Eventually, they persuaded the management, and the police were then brought in. So this is the key moment. This is 2017 now. So in 2017, the police so what they do is they've got the National Crime Agency have a register of experts. And on that register was Dr. Dewey Evans, who has been a consultant paediatrician involved in these sort of kind of cases for, 30 years, really experienced. So they contact him in 2017 and they bring him into a police station in the Cheshire area, and they show him one of the cases of the babies, and that is one of the cases of the triplets that was murdered. And the police showed him that case file, and he looked at it, and he identified that the baby had probably been traumatized.
Right.
That was on first look, because the baby actually had a bruise where he thought the liver was. So his first kind of take on that was this baby, I think, has been attacked. So what he did then was he said to the police, I don't want to know about any suspect. I don't want to know about any evidence that you have. All I want is every single, not just the ones that Lucy Letby was present at. That is not true. The expert asked for every single collapse of a child that could not be explained across those 2 years, 2015 and 2016. So what the police did, they went away, they got every single case, irrespective of who was on duty, and gave him, it was about 32 case files that he got on the first batch. And he went through those 32 case files, and he came up with what he describes as 25 suspicious events. 25 suspicious events.
Yeah, but there were 6, weren't there? You said there were maybe more than that, and it went down to 25. I'm just reading in the Times today that the table that we're talking about did not include 6 other deaths during that period for which Lucy Letby was not charged If it had, the results would have appeared more mixed and the evidence against Lucy Letby less damning.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but all I can say is those 25 suspicious events were what created table, because what they did was they said the 25 suspicious events they put into a table with the chronological order initially of the date of the suspicious event, and against the other axis was the nurses present. And by the time you get to the third, in chronological order, only Lucy Letby was there.
Okay.
She was there for 25 out of the 25 suspicious events.
Yeah.
And the closest other nurse was present for 7 shifts.
Okay, David. Yeah, David, we're gonna have to leave it there just because we don't have any more time. But this is something, no doubt, that we are going to talk about again, because there does seem to be, certain people who didn't want to talk about this, obviously, during the trial, and why would they? Why should they? Are now raising some concerns, and I would say that if you want to read, there's a double page on this in the Times today. It takes a bit of reading. But I was just quoting from it there. It's very interesting. How safe are the Lucy Letby convictions for baby murder? Some of you saying we shouldn't be giving airtime to people like the professor. But some of you are disagreeing.